The distant howl of a lone wolf pierced the cold Montana night as Violet Lambert stared blankly at the coins her mother counted on the weathered kitchen table. The lantern light caught the gold pieces, making them gleam with a promise that belonged to everyone but her. It was 1878, and Violet had just turned 18 last week, old enough, her mother had declared, to be sold like cattle to the highest bidder. $50 is fair, Martha Lambert said, pushing the money across the table toward the stranger. He was a man twice Violet's age, with hard eyes and calloused hands that had already tried to wander where they shouldn't. Barton Hollies, a cattle baron from the next county, had been eyeing Violet since she was 16. "She'll work hard and warm your bed. That's all a man needs, isn't it?" Violet clutched her shawl tighter around her shoulders, fighting back the hot tears that threatened to spill. The small cabin that had been her home for all 18 years of her life suddenly felt like a prison. Her father had been dead 3 years now, killed by a rattlesnake bite while working their failing farm, and her mother had grown bitter and desperate with each passing season. "Ma, please," Violet whispered, her voice barely audible over the crackling fire in the hearth. "I can work. I can help us survive without this." Martha's eyes hardened. "Survive? Look around you, girl. The crops failed again. The bank's taking the land next month. Where do you think we'll go? At least this way you'll have a roof over your head and food in your belly." She turned back to Hollies. "She'll be ready to leave at first light." Hollies grunted his approval, his eyes traveling slowly over Violet's slender frame. "I'll be back at dawn. Have her packed." He tipped his hat to Martha, deliberately ignoring Violet as he strode out the door. When the door slammed behind him, Violet turned to her mother. "How could you? Your own daughter." "It's called survival," Martha snapped, already tucking the money into her dress pocket. "Besides, plenty of women marry for less than what Hollies can provide. You'll have fine dresses, servants, a big house. I'll be nothing more than property," Violet cried, slamming her fist on the table. "Is that all I am to you? Something to be bartered away when times get hard?" Martha's face softened for just a moment before hardening again. "Go pack your things." Morning comes early. Violet retreated to her small room, mind racing. She had until dawn to decide her fate. Running away seemed impossible. Where would she go? The nearest town was 15 miles away, and the wilderness between was filled with dangers no young woman should face alone. As she folded her meager belongings into a cloth sack, tears streamed down her face. She had dreamed of love, of a life of her choosing, not being sold to a man who looked at her with hunger rather than tenderness. The night grew long as Violet sat by her window, watching the moon track across the sky. A thick fog had begun to roll in from the nearby creek, blanketing the land in a ghostly white shroud. It was past midnight when she heard the steady rhythm of hoofbeats approaching through the fog. Curious, Violet leaned closer to the window. The hoofbeats slowed as they neared the cabin, and through the swirling mist emerged the silhouette of a rider. Tall and broad-shouldered, he sat straight in the saddle as his horse picked its way carefully through the fog-draped yard. Violet's heart quickened. There was something commanding about the mysterious rider that made her breath catch. She watched as he dismounted with practiced ease and tied his horse to the hitching post. The stranger removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck, and approached the cabin door. 3 firm knocks broke the silence of the night. Violet heard her mother stirring, grumbling about late visitors, and slipped from her room to the main area of the cabin just as Martha opened the door, oil lamp in hand. "What business brings you here at this ungodly hour?" Martha demanded, holding the lamp higher to illuminate the visitor's face. "The name's Dawson Quinn, madam," he said, his voice deep but gentle. My wagon broke an axle about 2 miles back. I've been leading my horse through this fog looking for shelter. I'd be grateful for a place to rest until morning." In the lamplight, Violet could see him clearly now. He was younger than she first thought, perhaps mid-20s, with a strong jaw shadowed by a day's stubble and eyes the color of a summer sky. He wore the practical clothing of a working cowboy, not the flashy gear of gunslingers or the fine suits of gamblers. "We've little enough for ourselves," Martha began, but Violet stepped forward. "We have space by the fire," she offered, ignoring her mother's sharp glance. Something about this stranger made her want to help him, or perhaps she simply wanted to delay the inevitable morning that would deliver her into Holly's hands. Dawson's eyes found Violet's, and something passed between them, a spark of recognition, though they had never met. He nodded his thanks, a small smile playing at his lips. "I can pay for the trouble," he said, reaching for a small pouch at his belt. Martha's demeanor changed instantly. "Well, in that case, come in, Mr. Quinn. We don't turn away paying guests." As Dawson stepped into the cabin, Violet noticed how he filled the small space with his presence. He moved with the easy confidence of a man who knew his place in the world. It made her painfully aware of how uncertain her own future was. "My daughter can make you some coffee," Martha said, gesturing toward the kitchen area. "I'm heading back to bed. Dawn comes early." When Martha disappeared into her room, an uncomfortable silence settled between Violet and Dawson. He stood awkwardly by the fire, warming his hands. "I'm sorry for the intrusion, Miss Lambert." "Violet Lambert," she supplied, moving to put the coffee pot on the stove. "It's no intrusion. We don't get many visitors out this way." "You're a good distance from town," he observed. "Your family farms this land." "We did," Violet said, a bitter edge creeping into her voice. "Not anymore. The bank takes it next month." Something in her tone made Dawson study her more carefully. "And what happens then?" Violet turned away, busying herself with the coffee. "I'll be gone by morning. My mother has made arrangements." "Arrangements?" Dawson echoed, his brow furrowing. "I'm to marry Barton Hollies," Violet said, the words tasting like poison on her tongue. "Or more accurately, I've been sold to him for $50. The shock on Dawson's face quickly turned to anger. "Sold?" "That's not legal, Miss Lambert." "Legal or not, it happens," she replied quietly. "My mother sees no other way." Dawson's jaw tightened as he watched her pour the coffee with trembling hands. "And what do you see, Miss Lambert?" The question caught her off guard. No one had asked what she wanted in a very long time. "I see a cage," she finally whispered. "A life of servitude to a man who sees me as property." Dawson accepted the coffee cup but set it aside untouched. "Do you want to leave?" Violet's heart hammered in her chest. "I have nowhere to go." "That's not what I asked." Their eyes met, and in that moment Violet felt as though her entire future hung in the balance. "Yes," she breathed. "More than anything." Dawson nodded once decisively. "Then I'll help you." "Why would you do that? You don't even know me." "I know enough," he said simply. "I know what it's like to be trapped with no choice." He glanced toward Martha's closed door. "Pack only what you need. We leave in an hour before your mother wakes." Violet hesitated only a moment before nodding. "I'm already packed." For the next hour, they spoke in hushed tones by the fire. Dawson explained he was headed to Helena to start a new life, having saved enough money from years of driving cattle to buy a small ranch. He had no family, no ties, just a dream of building something that was his own. "You could find work in town," he suggested. "I know people who could help you get settled." "Thank you," Violet said, though the thought of being alone in a strange city terrified her almost as much as marriage to Hollies. When the time came to leave, Violet left her mother a note, not an apology but a goodbye. She would not ask forgiveness for choosing her own path. With her small bag in hand, she followed Dawson into the midnight fog. His horse, a sturdy bay gelding, snorted softly as they approached. "His name's Rusty," Dawson said, patting the animal's neck. "He's strong enough to carry us both until we reach my wagon." He helped Violet mount first, then swung up behind her. The closeness of him, his chest against her back, his arms reaching around her to take the reins, sent an unexpected warmth through her despite the chilly night. As they rode away from the only home she'd ever known, Violet felt both terror and exhilaration. The fog swirled around them like spirits, cloaking their escape as Dawson guided Rusty confidently through the darkness. They had ridden for perhaps half an hour when Violet heard the distant sound of hoofbeats, many of them coming fast. She tensed, and Dawson felt it. "What is it?" he asked, slowing Rusty to listen. "Riders," she whispered. "And there's only one person who would come looking for me in the middle of the night." "Hollies," Dawson muttered. He must have decided not to wait until dawn. He urged Rusty into a faster pace, but the heavy fog made speed dangerous. The sounds of pursuit grew louder behind them. "We won't outrun them," Violet said, panic rising in her throat. "We don't need to outrun them," Dawson replied calmly. "We just need to hide until they pass." He guided Rusty off the trail into a thick copse of pines. The fog hung even heavier here, creating a natural shield. They dismounted, and Dawson covered Rusty's muzzle with his hand to keep the horse from whinnying. Minutes later, Hollies and 4 of his men thundered past, their torches cutting eerie paths through the fog. Violet held her breath, pressed against Dawson's side until the sounds of their pursuit faded. "How did you know to do that?" Violet whispered once it was safe to speak. Dawson's face darkened. "I wasn't always a cowhand. I fought in the war, then scouted for the army after." "You learn to disappear when your life depends on it." This revelation made Violet look at him differently. There was more to this quiet cowboy than she had first thought. "We should keep moving," he said. "My wagon isn't far. Once we get it fixed, we can make better time." Dawn was breaking when they reached Dawson's wagon. True to his word, the front axle had cracked, but he worked efficiently to repair it with tools and supplies from the wagon bed. Violet helped where she could, handing him tools and holding pieces in place as he worked. "You're good with your hands," she observed as he skillfully spliced the broken axle with a length of hardwood he shaped with his knife. "My father was a wheelwright," he explained. "He taught me his trade before the war took him. By the time the sun had fully risen, the wagon was ready." Dawson hitched Rusty to it and helped Violet climb onto the seat. "Helena is still 3 days' ride," he said, settling beside her. "Hollies will be looking for us on the main roads." "Then we don't take the main roads," Violet said with a confidence she didn't entirely feel. Dawson smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his serious face. "I like the way you think, Miss Lambert." They traveled by less used trails, keeping to forests and valleys where possible. Each night they made camp early, hidden from the road. Dawson taught Violet how to build a fire that produced little smoke and how to listen to the forest for signs of danger. On their second night on the trail, as they sat beside a small fire, eating rabbit stew Dawson had prepared, Violet found herself studying his profile in the firelight. "Why did you really help me?" she asked suddenly. "The truth this time." Dawson was quiet for a long moment, stirring the embers with a stick. "I had a sister," he finally said. "Her name was Eliza. After our parents died, we were separated. I was sent to our uncle's farm. She went to a distant cousin. By the time I was old enough to look for her, she was gone." His voice grew tight. "The cousin had married her off to a man 3 times her age for a piece of land and a mule when I found her." He trailed off, then cleared his throat. "She died in childbirth the year before. She was 17. Violet's heart ached for him. I'm so sorry. When you told me what your mother had done, I saw Eliza, he admitted. I couldn't fail another young woman the way I failed her. Without thinking, Violet reached across and laid her hand on his. You didn't fail her, Dawson. And you didn't fail me. You saved me. His hand turned beneath hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. Something shifted between them in that moment, a connection deeper than gratitude or obligation. The next morning, they continued their journey with a new awareness of each other. Their conversations flowed more easily, punctuated by shared smiles and occasional brushes of their hands. Violet found herself noticing things about Dawson she hadn't before: the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he laughed, how gently he spoke to Rusty, the protective way he positioned himself whenever they heard riders on the main road. By mid-afternoon, dark clouds had gathered on the horizon, promising a storm. Dawson frowned at the sky. We need better shelter than the wagon tonight. There's an old line shack about 2 miles west of here, if I remember right. Used to belong to the Circle M Ranch before it went under. They reached the shack just as the first heavy raindrops began to fall. It was small but sturdy, with a stone fireplace and a single room containing a rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, and a narrow cot. Dawson insisted Violet take the cot while he would sleep on the floor near the fire. The storm raged outside, rain lashing the small windows and thunder shaking the walls. Inside, however, was surprisingly cozy. Dawson built a fire while Violet prepared their simple supper from their dwindling supplies. We'll reach Helena by tomorrow evening if the weather clears, Dawson said as they ate. I know a boarding house where you can stay until you find work. Violet nodded, though the thought of saying goodbye to Dawson filled her with an unexpected sadness. In just 3 days, he had become more important to her than she wanted to admit. What will you do once you get your ranch? She asked, trying to keep her voice light. Build a house first, he said, his eyes taking on a distant look. Nothing fancy but solid, then start with a small herd. Build slowly. He glanced at her. What about you? What would you do if you could choose anything? Violet had never been asked such a question. I'd like to teach, I think. I've always loved books, learning, or maybe open a shop someday, she smiled wistfully. Mostly, I just want to be free to make my own choices. You will be, Dawson assured her. You're stronger than you know, Violet. The way he said her name sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cold. Their eyes met across the small table, and the air between them seemed to change, becoming charged with unspoken feelings. A particularly loud crash of thunder broke the moment, making them both jump. Violet laughed nervously, rising to clear their plates. As she moved past Dawson, her foot caught on an uneven floorboard. She stumbled and he shot up to catch her, his strong hands gripping her waist. Their faces were suddenly inches apart, her hands braced against his chest. Violet could feel the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm, the warmth of his breath on her cheek. Violet, he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. Before she could respond, the door burst open with a bang. 3 men stood silhouetted in the doorway, rain dripping from their slickers. The leader stepped forward, water pooling at his feet, a revolver aimed squarely at Dawson's chest. Well, ain't this cozy, Barton Hollies drawled, his cold eyes fixed on Violet. Found you at last, girl. Your mama's worried sick. Dawson moved Violet behind him, his body tense. She's not going anywhere with you, Hollies sneered. That right. Last I checked, I paid good money for her. She's mine by rights. She's not property, Dawson said evenly, though Violet could feel the rage building in him. She's a free woman who makes her own choices. Hollies laughed, a harsh sound that made Violet flinch. Women don't make choices in my world, Cowboy. Now step aside before I put a hole in you. Violet gripped Dawson's arm, terrified for him. "Dawson, don't. It's not worth your life." "You're worth everything," he murmured, just loud enough for her to hear. One of Holly's men moved forward, reaching for Violet. In a blur of motion, Dawson struck, driving his fist into the man's jaw with a sickening crack. The man crumpled to the floor, but Dawson had no time to celebrate. Holly's gun swung toward him, and Violet screamed as the shot rang out. Dawson dropped to one knee, clutching his side, blood seeping between his fingers. "Run, Violet," he gasped. Instead, she grabbed the cast iron skillet from the table and swung it with all her might at Holly's arm. The gun flew from his grasp, clattering across the floor. The third man lunged for it, but Dawson, despite his wound, tackled him to the ground. The cabin erupted into chaos. Violet found herself struggling with Holly's, his fingers digging painfully into her arms as he tried to drag her toward the door. She fought wildly, kicking and scratching, fueled by desperation and newfound courage. "Let her go," Dawson roared, having subdued the other man. He staggered to his feet, blood staining his shirt but determination burning in his eyes. Holly's pulled a knife from his boot, pressing it against Violet's throat. "Back off, Cowboy. She's leaving with me one way or another." Violet could feel the cold steel against her skin, but she refused to show fear. Meeting Dawson's eyes, she saw him give the smallest nod. Understanding flashed between them. In one swift movement, Violet stomped hard on Holly's instep and drove her elbow into his ribs. His grip loosened just enough for her to break free. Dawson was there in an instant, delivering a powerful blow to Holly's jaw that sent the man sprawling. "Get the rope from my saddlebag," Dawson told her, pressing one hand to his bleeding side while keeping Holly's covered with the man's own dropped gun. Within minutes, all three men were bound securely. Dawson, pale but steady, stood guard while Violet examined his wound. The bullet had grazed his side, painful but not life-threatening. "We need to get you to a doctor," she said, cleaning the wound as best she could with water and a strip torn from her petticoat. "We need to get these men to the sheriff first," Dawson countered. "The storm's letting up. If we leave at first light, we can make Helena by afternoon." They spent an uncomfortable night watching their prisoners. Holly's alternated between threats and offers of money, both of which Dawson ignored. When dawn broke, they loaded the bound men into the back of the wagon and set off for Helena. The journey was tense, with Dawson growing paler as the hours passed. Violet took the reins, following his directions while casting worried glances at the blood seeping through his makeshift bandage. Helena appeared on the horizon just as the sun began its westward descent, a sprawling frontier town of wooden buildings and bustling streets. Dawson directed Violet to the sheriff's office, where they were met with raised eyebrows and curious stares. Sheriff Thomas Miller, a grizzled man with a steel-gray mustache, listened to their story with growing interest. When they finished, he nodded thoughtfully. "Selling a woman ain't legal, even out here in the territories," he confirmed. "And attempted murder's a serious charge. These boys'll face the judge when he comes through next week." While deputies took charge of the prisoners, Sheriff Miller insisted on taking Dawson to the town doctor. Violet accompanied them, unwilling to leave Dawson's side after everything they'd been through. Dr. Wilson, a kindly older gentleman, cleaned and stitched Dawson's wound, declaring him lucky. "Few inches to the left and we'd be having a different conversation," he told them soberly. The sheriff arranged a room for Violet at the Pine Tree boarding house, run by a widow named Mrs. Porter. Dawson was given a room at the doctor's insistence to rest and recover. "I'll come see you tomorrow," Violet promised as they parted outside the doctor's office. "Thank you, Dawson, for everything." He caught her hand, his eyes intense despite his weariness. "We're not saying goodbye, Violet. This is just the beginning." The next few days passed in a blur. Violet found work helping at the boarding house in exchange for her room and meals. Mrs. Porter, taking a liking to the young woman, introduced her to the local schoolteacher, who mentioned they were looking for an assistant. Each evening, Violet visited Dawson, watching with relief as color returned to his face and strength to his body. They talked for hours about his plans for the ranch, her hopes for teaching, their childhoods, their dreams. With each visit, the connection between them deepened. A week after their arrival in Helena, Dawson was well enough to show Violet the land he'd purchased, 40 acres of rolling meadow and pine forest with a creek running through it, just 3 miles outside town. "It's beautiful," Violet said, standing beside him on a ridge overlooking what would become his home. "You can build a wonderful life here." Dawson turned to her, taking both her hands in his. "I'm hoping it might be our life, Violet." Her heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "I mean," he said softly, "that I've fallen in love with you. These past days have shown me what kind of woman you are: brave, kind, determined. I don't want to build this place without you beside me." Tears filled Violet's eyes. "Dawson, we barely know each other." "I know enough," he said, echoing his words from that first night in her mother's cabin. "I know that you make me want to be better, to build something lasting. I know that when I think of the future, I see you in it." He squeezed her hands gently. "I'm not asking for an answer now. I'm asking you to give us a chance to court properly, to let what's growing between us flourish." Violet looked out over the land, imagining a house nestled among the pines, children running through the meadow, evenings spent by the fire with this man who had risked everything to save her. It was a vision of a future she had never dared to dream of. "Yes," she whispered, turning back to him with a smile that rivaled the sun. "I'd like that very much." Dawson's answering smile was radiant. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he lowered his head until his lips met hers in a gentle kiss that promised tomorrow and all the days after. 5 years later, Violet stood on the porch of their 2-story ranch house, watching as Dawson taught their 3-year-old son, Thomas, to ride his first pony. Their daughter, Elizabeth, named for Dawson's lost sister, slept peacefully in her cradle beside Violet's rocking chair. The Quinn ranch had prospered, with a growing herd of cattle and horses that were becoming known throughout the territory. Violet had indeed become a teacher, dividing her time between their children and the small school that had been built as more families settled in the area. Word had reached them 2 years ago that Martha Lambert had died, alone and bitter to the end. Violet had grieved not for the mother she had known, but for the mother she should have had, one who valued her daughter's happiness above all else. Barton Hollies had served his time for attempted murder and left the territory, his reputation and business in tatters. The debt he'd owed for Violet had never been repaid, a fact that gave her a small measure of satisfaction. As Dawson lifted Thomas from the pony and swung him high into the air, the boys' delighted laughter carrying across the yard, Violet felt a profound sense of gratitude. That midnight ride through the fog had not only saved her from a life of servitude, but had delivered her into the arms of a man who saw her true worth. Dawson looked up, catching her eye from across the yard. Even now, after 5 years of marriage, his smile could make her heart race. He set Thomas down, whispering something in the boy's ear that sent him running toward the house. "Mama," Thomas called, his chubby legs carrying him as fast as they could. "Papa says to tell you he loves you more than the stars." Violet laughed, scooping her son into her arms as Dawson approached, his eyes full of the same love that had shone in them the day he'd found her. "Is that so?" she asked, looking past Thomas to the man who had become her world. Dawson climbed the porch steps and wrapped his arms around both of them. "Every day a little more," he confirmed, pressing a kiss to her forehead. As the sun began to set over their land, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, Violet leaned into her husband's embrace, surrounded by the family they had created together. From property to be sold to beloved wife and mother, her journey had been one of courage and choice, of finding love in the most unexpected place. And as Dawson's lips found hers in a tender kiss, Violet knew with absolute certainty that she had found not just freedom, but a home where she truly belonged.